Welcome to the Mary Mavis Show, the show that focuses on remarkable results and your personal power. Here is your host, Mary Mavis.
Today I have two guests, and we are talking about a critical competency for surviving and thriving in organizations. Your resilience in the face of challenges, disappointments, and frustrations. First, let me introduce Dean Becker. Dean Becker is an accomplished executive and consultant. He was the co-founder and now managing director of Adaptiv Learning Systems. Adaptiv is a leader in the development and delivery of research-based resilience assessments, coaching, and training programs. Prior to creating Adaptiv Learning Systems, Dean founded and ran Preferred Medical Services, a physician billing and practice management firm. He began his career as a marketing representative for IBM, which led him to roles in executive search in the information technology industry. In his work at Adaptiv over the last 25 years, Dean has trained over 100,000 professionals and leaders across the globe. He holds an MBA in Medical Group Management from the University of St. Thomas and a BA in Psychology from Franklin and Marshall College. Welcome to the show, Dean.
Thanks, Mary. Nice to be here.
My other guest is Meredith Friedman. Meredith is the Director of Operations at CubeSmart, a national real estate investment trust company, where she spearheads enterprise-wide initiatives across 1,250 plus stores in 40 states. The vast majority of Meredith's career has been in human resources roles, where she has created and implemented scalable talent acquisition, leadership development, and talent management systems and processes. In 2018, she received the Delaware Valley Human Resources Person of the Year Award. Twice, Meredith has ventured away from human resources to lead frontline business operations. First at Independence Blue Cross as the Director of Appeals and Grievance, and secondly in her current role. Meredith holds an AB in Psychology from Harvard and is a graduate of the Wharton Management Program. Welcome to the show, Meredith.
Glad to be here.
Great. All right. So let's get started. And I'm going to ask you first, Dean, to tell us what you mean by resilience and how did you develop your approach? So 25 years you've had this approach. It's well honed. How did you get started? And what do you really mean by resilience?
And how long is this podcast, Mary? I think I could probably
don't take us through the whole 25 years.
That's fine. I'll start with the definition, and I'm glad you asked me because the challenge we have right now is resilience really has become a buzzword, hasn't it? I mean, you can't read an article or watch a news clip without the word coming up. And we mean so much more by resilience than even the dictionary definition. If you start with that, which is something like recovering quickly from setbacks, bouncing back, but it's much more. For us, it's really the ability to stay cool under fire, to stay focused, engaged, optimistic, and always moving forward towards the solution of whatever problem, challenge, or opportunity we're facing. But there's more. For us, resilience is also about dialing our lives well and truly into the positives. It's not just about going from -5 back to baseline. It's about going from +3 to +8. And that's something that I think goes beyond what most people mean by it. And the work we do really takes people well beyond the sort of the core meaning of the word. Is that helpful? I hope it is.
Yeah, and so it's really a power that you have. It's giving yourself more power.
Indeed, it is. And when I think back on I can't believe it's been 25 years. But in that time, I mean, we started, I don't know how far back or how much detail you'd like me to go into, but we started in late 1997 by licensing from the lab of Dr. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania Department of Psychology, a family of research-based training programs that were designed to build resilience. And we've taken that work over that time and developed it into commercially viable coaching, assessment, training solutions. And what's interesting is that as I look back on the 25 years, I mean, my goodness, we've been through so many ups and downs. Let's see, we were sort of blown up by the .com bust of 2000, 2001, and we recovered and rebuilt and we're thriving. And then we got knocked back by the Great Recession of 2007, 8, 9, clawed our way back, built it back, survived, thrived. And now more recently, March 13th, 2020, our live in-classroom training business, as we had known it for so long, disappeared because of the pandemic. So as I look back on this, I realize we've been using our own resilience skills for many years, not just to hang on or to put the wheels back on the wagon, but to really find ways to thrive no matter what the situation. And that kind of brings us to the present time.
Right. So how do you think, share your core framework? So I know you do have a framework. It's well honed. It's something that you teach people. For those of you joining us on YouTube, I've asked Dean to share a slide that he can talk to about the framework.
Sure, happy to. So basically, just again, by way of quick history, when we started the business, we created and researched and created the model. I have two PhD psychologists from Penn who were my designers, and we created an understanding that they're psychologists, a 7-factor model. I think psychologists, especially PhDs, do everything in sevens, but these were the 7 factors that really define resilience. And what we found over time is that, yeah, this is great. And it was a little bit too techy for our audience. And it was kind of too many moving parts. So just over time, we decided, you know what? And as we analyzed and evaluated the many thousands of data points that we had, we realized that these factors, these resilience factors, which are really inner strengths or abilities, they tend to combine and blend into 4 very discrete areas. I chose to look at them as superpowers because that's kind of how they feel when you're putting on your resilience suit and wearing them. The first of those is self-control, and self-control really embodies what we meant by emotion regulation and impulse control. It's the ability to stay cool under fire. The second superpower is solutions focus. That drops directly out of the resilience factor of causal analysis, which is the ability to accurately and comprehensively determine root cause and then steer your resources to where they're likely to do the most good. Next superpower is positivity. Positivity is a blend of 2 things. On the one side, it's a self-confidence, a belief and a sense of mastery, a belief that you can solve the problems that come your way, and optimism. Optimism, a belief in a reasonably bright future, but in accord with reality. And we call it realistic optimism because our work shows that people who are overly optimistic tend to minimize risk. They tend to get blindsided by the bad stuff. So self-efficacy and optimism boil into the superpower of positivity. And finally, what our work has shown is that resilient people truly have line of sight, clear line of sight to how they make a difference. They're connected to things much bigger than themselves. They're connected to other people. They're connected to challenges, opportunities, relationships, and we call that connectedness. So these are the 4 superpowers, and they essentially distill down into that big bowl that we call resilience. And that's
so 4 superpowers: self-control, solutions focus, positivity, and connectedness.
Correct. And what we find is that the most resilient people tend to have a good blend of the 4 of these superpowers. It's interesting, in some cases, though, there are some powers which overplayed can get in the way. So, for instance, if someone has very high self-control, but very low connectedness, they might come across very mechanically. And in fact, when we test people in different job types, we find that people who are in the STEM world, scientists, anyone who does quantitative thinking, quantitative work, tend to be very high in self-control and solutions focus, but low on positivity and connectedness. So on the other hand, we will find salespeople who tend to be very high in positivity, but tend to be very low in self-control and solutions focused. So the nice thing about this model is that no matter where one starts, resilience is a continuum. It exists on a continuum. No matter where you are, you can boost it through skills. And that's really what our work is all about.
And as I always think about these kinds of frameworks, it's about, maximizing the impact of your strengths. So if you do have the high self-control, but you're not as connected, then you can work on the connectedness, but you can rest in the self-control. Is that part of the value when someone goes through this kind of assessment?
Yeah, without a doubt. The assessment gives us a baseline. It lets us see where someone is right now. And it gives the participant, the testee, if you will, the opportunity to see what you just said, see where they're strong, where, on the other hand, they could use development. And then they can use that knowledge, and we help them and guide them through our program towards the skills that are going to create the biggest bang for the buck. And when I think about that, because people say, well, where do you start? And it's interesting. It's such a foundational set of skills, but I think where resilience really begins is with our ability to maintain a really good baseline of emotional control. And in our programs, just about everyone starts on a skill and on sort of a learning set that has to do with that very point. When I'm stuck, when I'm in the midst of trying to deal with an adversity of any kind, whether it's at work or at home or somewhere in between, it's typically some emotion that gets in my way: frustration, anger, sadness, guilt, embarrassment, shame, and it'll steer me away from good solution. So where resilience for us really begins is, let's see what we can do about interfering with that sort of automatic thought emotion process and get people back on track more quickly.
Yeah, so we're going to focus on that first superpower, self-control, today. As we talk more about your framework, and as Meredith brings some of her experience into this. But maybe you could, before we go to Meredith, maybe you can share, Dean, about one of the sort of, what do you do when I get emotionally triggered and all of a sudden you're sort of stuck? You have a particular framework that you work with people to move positively through that.
Yes, we do, and I mean, it really is we have a skill that we call trap it, map it, zap it, or TMZ. But before we get to that, what we build on, and if we have someone either in a training group or in an individual coaching relationship, the first thing we do is get them to realize that it's, by and large, what we think in the moment when we're facing a situation of any kind. It's our thinking that directly drives what we feel and what we do.
Right.
In most cases, people are not paying a lot of attention to their thinking. So the first thing we'll do is get someone to see, okay, I just got into a situation where I got really anxious. I was really worried about something. What was I thinking at the time? And we give them a process, a roadmap, if you will, that allows them to decode sort of the relationship between the type of thought they're having and the emotion they're having. And then if the emotion isn't serving them well, the skill gives them the ability to go back and capture the thinking that's leading to it and essentially reframing it. That's a very early and basic starting point of the skill set. But the interesting thing about it is it's a fairly sticky skill, because once people use it and they say, oh, I feel better already, and they'll continue to use it, and it becomes sort of lower brain over time. But it's a skill. It's reps. Yeah.
I often think of, like, thinking and feeling are intertwined. They get mixed up. So if they feel the emotional trigger, one of the things that you're saying in your language is to unwind what was the thinking that was connected to the emotional. Is that right?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And one of the we use a fairly common or a fairly basic situation that we ask our participants to participate in when we first get them thinking about this stuff. We'll say, imagine yourself. in this little drama that I'm creating for you. You're exhausted. You've put in 2 or 3 really, really tough weeks. You are burned out. You're trying to struggle through this back to office hybrid. You are frustrated because with the staff shortage that you're facing, you're just way resource constrained. You're just trying to manage. It's Friday afternoon. All you want to do is go home and just chillax. That's a technical term. And in that moment, your spouse, partner, significant other says to you, Mary, you know what? You are becoming a workaholic and you really need to start making me and this family more of a priority. In that moment, what are you thinking? What's going through your head like ticker tape, like the crawl at the bottom of the CNN screen? Now, what most of our participants will do, because this is sort of low-hanging fruit for anger, they'll say, I was really angry. Okay, well, what were you thinking? I'm thinking, really? I don't deserve this. I deserve a little bit more respect. Am I doing this for my health? No, I'm doing this so that we can take that European vacation that we promised you and the kids. So I think, I think you'd really need to back off. And that kind of thinking, what we let the person know is that type of thought is really about how your rights are being violated. So if you're having thoughts that your rights are being violated, it's going to go right to anger. Now, me, on the other hand, I'm going to feel very differently. I'm going to be anxious. So what am I thinking? I'm thinking, you know what? This isn't good. I thought I had all these balls juggled well. What's going to happen next? I'm going to have to either put less time in at work, or I'm going to have to do more damage control at home. And this thinking we call future threat. It's future threat thinking. And what we do for each of the 6 or 7 classic, common, non-resilient emotions is we will code the kind of thinking that leads to each emotion so that people can then work backwards and say, I'm a little worried right now. Future threat? Really? I don't know. I think it's just my radar pinking off. I think I'm kind of scanning the world for what's coming to get me, and I'm overreacting, so I need to calm down. And in that moment, I'm going to be less anxious. If I'm angry, I might be thinking, you know what? Anger, violation of rights. Really? Who violated my rights? Who's stepping on my toes? Is someone really disrespecting me? You know what? My anger's at a 5, but I think the trespass is maybe at a 2. So let me calm down a little bit. And what I just did for you verbally was to demonstrate what people go through when they use this so-called trap it, map it, zap it skill. They're trapping the emotion, mapping it to the thinking that's driving it, and then zapping it if it's not serving them well.
And I think what sounds so useful to me is to have language for those different types of thinking.
Yeah.
That you can then easily recall and say, oh, this is the kind of thinking. This is my anxiety thinking, whatever your framework says. Yeah. I want to bring Meredith in here. Meredith, you've gone through the training that Dean's firm offers, and you're a pretty significant leader. How have you used this way of thinking, this way of self-monitoring? Tell us a story.
Absolutely. So ever since the pandemic started, I think all of us have faced instances where our resilience has become critical, right? And one example that comes to mind for me was I had been in a human resources role for many years at CubeSmart, and in the summer of 2019, I was promoted to Director of Operations, reporting into the Chief Operating Officer, and then 6 months later, COVID happened. And if ever there was a time to have a human resources-minded person in an operations role, this was the time. But this time also required a tremendous amount of flexibility and agility because things were changing rapidly. But in the beginning, we knew that we would need to temporarily close our stores. And then fortunately, we were named an essential service, providing storage to first responders, other essential services, as well as medical device companies. So my role in operations was to be the voice out to all of our stores across 40 states and give them direction on which signage to put up, which safety precautions to take. And it was a patchwork of responses in the moment, changing every day, and facing a lot of communication challenges, which really called upon my resilience skills to be able to adapt. And a couple months into this, and at this point, there were 24/7 days that were happening in my role. A couple months into it, my boss called me and asked me to spearhead a really important initiative for the company. It was called Project New Day, and it was going to leverage the disruption that we were experiencing to accelerate change and develop innovative ways to respond to evolving customer preferences. And in the moment, when he first brought it up to me, I was struck by a feeling of frustration. And so I had to trap that, as Dean talks about, trap it, map it, zap it. And then I had to think about, okay, where is this frustration coming from? And it was this lack of resources. So I could barely walk away from my computer, let alone take my soon-to-be expiring vacation time, right? Where was I going to find the stamina to take on this huge initiative on top of all of the other responsibilities that I had? So I really needed to understand where that frustration was coming from. I mapped it to that lack of resources, and then I had the strength to zap it. So I took a deep breath and I gave some good thought to what my boss was presenting me with, which was an amazing opportunity where I'd be looked to throughout the organization to lead the direction into the future. I would be able to tap into any department and ask them for resources. And I realized opportunities like this don't come around all that often. And even though there were other pressures on me, this was actually going to energize me instead of sapping me of my energy. So that's how I've been able to apply these concepts of trap it, map it, zap it.
Yeah, so the initial experience was like, holy mackerel. How could you absolutely, how could you be asking me to do this extra thing on top of the enormity that's on my plate?
Exactly.
And you ended up with, this is a big opportunity that I'll figure out how to use it to energize myself.
You know, it's interesting, Mary. I'm sorry, Meredith, for speaking over you, but as you were speaking, it occurred to me that so many of our participants, especially the men in our classes, I hate to get gender specific, but what we've seen over time is that the men in our classes will not necessarily see the direct link for this particular piece of learning to work, but they'll go home and they'll use it at home. I've had more men come into our classes, maybe if it's a 2-day program, coming in the next day and saying, I just had the best conversation with my 14-year-old daughter, because instead of getting all wrapped up in her emotionality, she was getting all angry at me. And I realized in the moment, she's having some violation of rights thoughts. And I started talking to her about her thinking, not about what she was feeling. And we were off to the races. And then I watched the lights go on and they say, oh, just like at work when my boss gets angry at me. So it's kind of interesting to watch that take place. And we always sort of talk about the skill set in a corporate audience as a gift, because we say, look, no matter what happens, if you leave this company who's providing you this training tomorrow, you still have these skills for life. You can use them at home. You can use them in your next job, etc. So,
yeah. So life and work is a combination of situations and people, right? So you're going to have frustrating situations and people in your personal life as well as in your work life. And what's difficult or problematic or get you off your game for one person is not necessarily the same for someone else. So for someone else in your situation, Meredith, they might have actually ended up saying, I can't do this. I've got 3 elementary school kids at home. My husband is in the workplace, I can't see my way. And would you use the Zap It, Map It framework to get to that place too? So you could end up with a different decision, same scenario, different decision, but use the same process to say, what am I thinking and feeling? How do I map that forward into a solution? Is that right?
So, Mary, just so I'm clear, are you thinking about how would I use the Trap It, Map It, Zap It framework as a way to sort of prepare for or anticipate an upcoming challenge, or try it again?
No, not necessarily. I think what I was thinking about is that for each person, if they were in the same situation, which they won't be, but if for someone else with a different circumstance and a different way of thinking and a different tolerance or expectations, might have seen the whole thing differently than Meredith.
Yeah.
But the process could be the same. So you really think about, what is it that I'm feeling, map and thinking, how's my thinking generating that, and then mapping it out and coming to whatever the right decision is for you. Yeah, which for someone else might have been, very honored for the opportunity, but it's really not something I can do.
Well, there are two levels there. On the one level, it's basically we want somebody to be resilient such that they can make a fully informed decision for themselves based on real data, not based on how their mindset is filtering it. So, right. And at the next level, what we find is that individuals develop very different ways of mapping and scanning the world. So, for instance, and we develop what we call signature emotions or default emotions. Now, just about everyone develops them. My default or signature emotion at work is anxiety. Now, at home, my signature emotion is anger, right? At work, everything is my fault, my responsibility. At home, everything is Courtney's fault or her responsibility. Luckily, I have this Trap It, Map It, Zap It framework to keep me from getting in too much trouble. But here's the key. For me, the minute that I feel anxious, the first thing that I do is I get skeptical, because I think, that's Dean's emotion radar pinging off. That's the thinking I developed when I was 8 years old, and framing up since that time, getting in my way. So we cleared that away. Now, somebody else might have an emotional response in the moment that's completely valid, right? For Meredith, I think frustration makes all the sense in the world in that moment when her boss said to her, hey, let me give you another 5-pound sack to throw on your already overburdened self, right? But that was going to get in her way, and she knew that. So people will often ask, well, how about if I have an emotion and it's okay? It's correct. Do I not need to use Trap It, Map It, Zap It? I say, well, maybe you should use it just to get off autopilot and check and make sure that you've got good read on what's going on out in the world. But to your point, absolutely. Different people will have different responses, and there's no such thing as the right response for each person or for all of us. Each one's going to be separate, right?
Yeah, and I guess where I was thinking, and maybe in a different time in your life, Meredith, it would have, resilience might have been getting to the place of saying, it's perfectly fine for me to say no. Perfectly fine. So, because resilience isn't always about absorbing everything that gets done or absorbing all of what the challenge is. Resilience is sort of that internal, at least the way I think of it, that internal sort of recalibrating, right? Mm-hmm. So that you can be more fully present, be more conscious in your decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I took on this role to be challenged, to be stretched. Mm-hmm. And so what he was offering me resonated with that. So even though the circumstances of COVID had created disruption, I still had clear line of sight as to what I was what resonated for me. So that was
Right.
my path and my choice. I'd love to share with you a personal example of Trap It,
Great.
Map It, Zap It. So a few weeks ago, we had a 9 p.m. flight to Montreal. And like 6:30, the three of us were gathered and we're like, hey, let's get something to eat before we go to the airport. We have TSA pre-check, no big deal. We'll be fine. So we got to the airport around 7:45. We parked next to the terminals where the TSA pre-check was. Get in there, just have our carry-ons, and lo and behold, TSA pre-check line is closed. And so we had to go into the regular line. And the estimated wait time was going to be about 17 minutes. So we were really cutting it close. And all of a sudden, I could just feel the anxiety starting to build, right? So that was that's what I needed to trap, right? And to map it, I was like, wow, we really never should have stopped for dinner. We just should have gotten food here. We're going to miss our flight. There's no other flight left. And I started to go down that path and I had to stop myself. So I had to zap it and basically take a deep breath. And before I got too carried away with those emotions and say, well, the line is moving. I think we might make it. We might not get on the plane when our boarding group is called, but we will get on the plane and stay focused on moving forward and not letting it get the better of me, because the only person it was hurting, that anxiety was only hurting me.
So, or you could have missed your flight, and then you would be dealing with that reality, right?
Right.
But it didn't warrant you spending all of your time in the line being highly anxious. So you talked about taking a deep breath as a part of zapping it. Are there other ways that people zap where they are? Or is it, I mean, sounds like a typical thing where you'd say, oh, okay, whew, now I know that what it is, I'm going to release it.
There are three basic ways to zap. To me, the most effective way is to basically find a bit of counter evidence. This is sort of the cognitive approach, the thinking approach. Find a piece of counter evidence to prove the thinking that's led you to that non-resilient emotion, to find that false. But that takes a lot of work. Right.
Yeah.
Now, and the other thing is, very often when we get into an emotion like anxiety or anger, those two in particular, our thinking gets muddled. That's a great time to take a breath, use your mindfulness, meditative approaches. And sometimes the answer is just to pause, just count to 10. So, back in the old days, when we first pulled this work from Penn, the psychologist said, no, you must teach people how to, in the moment, real time, dispute their thinking and make it right. No, people can't do that. So you need some stopgap approaches. So yeah, it's breathe, pause, rethink.
Sometimes I take a walk.
Yeah, if you have time, that's a great thing to do.
Yeah. So take a walk, go do a mindless errand, and get myself sort of into a place where I can do the pulling apart and thinking it through.
Yeah, and of course that assumes that the situation is not right in your face. The tough part is that so often when we're hit by an adversity and we get stuck in an emotion that's not getting us where we want to go, or behavior that gets us where we want to go, we don't have time. So yeah, so sometimes you have to take a very quick walk in your brain and come back and keep going. Yeah.
I wonder, Meredith, as you've used this process, and I'm sure some of it is very focused on what you learned in the training, and then it becomes sort of more natural that, it becomes a part of the way that you process things. Is that true? That does your ability to get yourself back into a good place build over time?
My awareness is more heightened to this concept, and I can reach for it instantaneously.
Yeah, that was my assumption. So, Dean, our world seems to be getting more and more complex on a day-to-day basis. We've already come into very much of a global world. We're now in a hybrid or remote or in-person environment at the workplace. The challenges in our business and world are really big. How do you see the opportunities for building this competency into with your clients?
The opportunities are enormous, Mary. They truly are. But but it but the complexity and really more than the complexity, it's this endless uncertainty and
Ah,
uncertainty it really at our core. Uncertainty really drains our resilience resources very quickly. So to me, I'm glad you didn't use the VUCA term, but it is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. These are all things that just rip at our resilience capacity. So the need is greater than ever. The irony right now is that, very often I will be calling on the heads of human resources or on the head of learning and development or talent. And so many of them will say to me right now, you know what, Dean, I know we need you, but we're so desperately busy working our way through this hybrid routine. And what's happening is they know what they don't know, they know what they need, but the complexity and the uncertainty are keeping them from going where they need to go. I have to say that the marketing and the communications part of my business has become much more challenging. That said, once we get a group from an organization into a training program, and now happily, the pandemic gave us the opportunity to transform what we do largely into what's a blended approach, but 80% of which is inside of a collaborative online training platform, 80% with just live pull through, virtual live pull through sessions. Once the people get in, they say, "Huh, where have you been?" So the need is there, but once people stop running around with their hair on fire, which is what's been happening now, I'm going to be a lot happier. But the short answer to your question, yeah, absolutely. This is a time that's ripe for resilience. But let me finish by saying that what we really all need to focus on is not let's get more resilient, but let's look at what are the business challenges, what are the behavioral issues that low resilience kicks off or creates, or what productivity measures does low resilience interfere with, and let's start there, and then look at the resilience pieces as just a solution to a business challenge. And that's that's my wish every day, that we can start with the business challenges and work our way backwards towards what resilient skills we need. And by the way, what we've looked at today is such a tiny toe dip into a much deeper pool, but I think it's a great place to start. I do.
yeah, and so the other thing is individuals also have the same dilemma as I'm too busy to learn this. So
Indeed.
we're going to have in the people, if you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, you'll find links to Dean Becker's LinkedIn. He has a newsletter. There's a lot of content there. So if your organization doesn't have this training, there's certainly resources that you can tap into, and follow him on LinkedIn. Now, Meredith, I want to end with you and tell me how you think about this at an organizational level, for CubeSmart or any organization. What's the possibility if the organization got better at this?
The times are demanding that we're able to flex and adapt. So resilience goes hand in hand with that.
Mm-hmm.
So taking the time to teach our leaders, our staff, what does it mean to be resilient? Why is it important? How is it going to help you professionally, personally, is invaluable. Because if we keep doing the same things we always did and the world around us is a completely different place, we're not going to thrive. And resilience training will help people to thrive.
Yes, and every senior executive that heard your story earlier about, an initial sort of resistance to this big project on top of a big job, and your ability to work through that pretty quickly and get to a yes, or maybe in the other case, somebody getting to a no very quickly, is a really big opportunity, and then move ahead in a powerful way.
Mary, if I may just add in one thing, as I was listening to Meredith and thinking through what happens when you train a group of people. Let's look at a team. You can train a team, small, medium, or large. One of the things you're giving them, number one, is a sense of non-judgmentalness. I just made up a word. But more than that, you're giving them a common vocabulary around which to talk about that. And we see that happen again and again, where somebody will get angry and somebody else on the team will say, okay, how did I violate your rights? And suddenly the conversation becomes much easier because people are no longer judging each other, because they're coming at it from a great, it really is true emotional intelligence at its best. So for what that's worth.
I think that's absolutely accurate and a tremendous way to finish our conversation today, that this can be a part of your culture, and that people can help each other in moving ahead in a more productive way. So I want to thank you both for being here today. I have learned some things, and I'm with you, Dean. My anxiety gets, nobody would know it necessarily, but I'm the anxious person rather than the angry person. And I'm looking forward to using your tools and following your work as I have over the last several years. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Today's show was produced by Eric Aubrey. Our theme music was written and produced by Eric Aubrey and Tim McKinstry. The show's graphics were designed by Devin Marciano. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on Google, Apple, or Spotify. You can also find episodes at maviscompany.com, where I invite you to sign up for my weekly newsletter. I hope you use some nugget to help you create remarkable results in your world. Thank you for listening.